We've been doing football at 4 for even longer, and it's right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. 97.3 ESPN, Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen joins us here on the Sports Bash. Johnny Mac, well, it's Eagles world, and we're all just living in it because they always find a way to get their name at the top of the NFL list, even during the Super Bowl week, whether it be the 04 Super Bowl fights that are occurring currently, or the fact that one of their current players was potentially offered a job as the offensive coordinator, and he told the team, nah, I think I might play again next year.
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't think he was offered the offensive coordinator job. But it is interesting that they kind of felt him out to join the coaching staff. I don't think that part of it is a surprise at all. In fact, a lot of us talked about this guy, Josh McCown, we're speaking of, obviously, is thought of as a future coach in this league. And a lot of people think he's going to be a future head coach in this league. So you think about the fact that he's in your locker room. He's 40 years old. You've seen the impact he's had, not just on Carson Wentz and Nate Sudfeld, Kyle Lauletta, all the other quarterbacks, but the receivers loved him. So you can see his ability to communicate. Just he's a natural leader, and I think everyone sees that. So I think it was perceptive of the Eagles to try to go in that direction. I think if you read Jeff McClain's report, said about joining the coaching staff, no particular role. It could have been quarterbacks coach if you elevate Press Taylor, could have been receivers coach, or it could have been offensive coordinator.
It didn't rule out offensive coordinator. It said potentially even as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I think that would raise a lot of eyebrows. I think there were certain people, and I wrote today on 973ESPN.com, I compared it to when Derek Fisher took over the Knicks in the NBA. Because I remember at that time a lot of people were saying, this guy's got no experience. How could you make him an NBA head coach? And I said to myself, well, he did play for 2 decades in the league. And it's interesting to me from a professional sports standpoint. You have guys like that, and Josh is similar. He's 17, 18 years, whatever he's at. That's not experience. Playing quarterback in this league, an offensive coordinator, that's probably the best experience you could ever have. And you could certainly argue it's more experience than some of these young coaches that everybody's tripping over their tongues to get at. I mean, so I think you could spin it. I think it could work. I think if the Eagles really wanted him, they should have said, you know what, we're going to make you offensive coordinator. Then you put him in a quandary and say, man, if I'm the OC, I'm on the fast track to be a head coach. And maybe he rethinks that theory of I want to play another season. So I think once Jeffrey Lurie made the decision to force Doug Peterson to fire Mike Rowe, I think hiring Josh McCown would have been the way to go. That's my opinion.
Wow. Okay. I was going to say, John, that I agree with you. I think you can rationalize a move like that, but I think you could also look at it as, well, what was your plan? You were firing Mike Rowe. What was your plan? Was Josh McCown at the top of the list because that's technically the first person you spoke to about the job? Could he do it? Yes. Is he? You brought up a great point yesterday that I don't think a lot of people have thought of, and that's we never really plan for what a team does in adverse times, right? If things were rough on Doug Peterson, and like many coaches during adverse times, he says, I'm going to give up play calling for a little bit and see if my assistant doesn't do a better job. Listen, Josh McCown's not the guy that I want taking over the play calling in that situation because he's fresh out of being a quarterback. And not that he can't, but you question the experience and then, of course, the optics of that happening. So I think you could also rationalize and spin why that would be kind of a rash move instead of, I think most organizations would look at Josh McCown and say, why don't we start you off at either quarterback coach or wide receivers coach or special assistant or what is the great one? The quality control. And let him work his way into that greater position. When the Eagles do something like this, though, it kind of feels like there's that Eagles weird rashness to it, if that's what they had in mind.
Yeah, well, and I think that's it. I think this organization sort of craves that reputation as being forward thinking, and that was part of my argument. This is forward thinking. I think what you just said, Jeff, and I kind of explained that. That's the conventional wisdom. You can't jump to be an offensive coordinator straight out of your playing days. You have to be a quality control coach. You have to be a position coach. You have to work your way up. But I do think you can look at it, and that's why I brought up the Derek Fisher example from the NBA. You can look at it a different way and say, yeah, you know what? Quarterbacks in this league probably know more about play calling, at least the smart ones, than a lot of young offensive coaches. I'll just put it that way. I'm not going to say veteran guys, but I mean, if you look at Doug Peterson, for example, now he came up the traditional way and had to go through position coach, offensive coordinator, head coach, and all that, but he's a former long-time backup quarterback of this league. He understands play calls. You go back to a different era, and you talk about all the Hall of Fame quarterbacks from the 70s, whether you want to Roger Staubach, Terry Bradshaw, Bob Greasy, France Arthington, that whole lot, they all called their own plays. And the theory back then was, well, they could see things better than the coaches. And I don't know if that's necessarily incorrect, because if you go to the modern era of football, where everything has changed, obviously, and especially at the college level, where you literally have quarterbacks staring at the offensive coaches after they go up to the line of scrimmage, then they back away to be told what to do. And people have joked about Sean McVay being an exoskeleton, or Jared Goff being an exoskeleton for Sean McVay. It's Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. What made them brilliant? They could go up to the line of scrimmage. They saw what was happening, and they would tweak the play to get the offense into the best position. And I still think that is, if you can, now it's very difficult to get a Peyton Manning type who can process everything like that. It's very difficult to get a Tom Brady type. But if you can get that and you don't have an ego to say you don't want them controlling things at the line of scrimmage, you're not taking advantage of the situation. So I think there's a lot of ways you can look at this. And I would rather, I hate to pick on him, but I don't think he should have been interviewed. I think Josh McCown is more prepared for that job than Graham Harrell. I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Now, let me ask you this. There's a couple of things that spring off of this conversation. What do you make of the reported presence of Jeff Lurie in there?
Well, I think, and I hope everyone, this is just another layer of confirmation that what have we been saying, that he's involved in this process. The owner doesn't have exit meetings with players. Doesn't.
Right.
That's a Doug Peterson thing. That's a Howie Roseman.
Right. That part of the report was in there because it is not normal that a backup quarterback would be having an exit interview with coach, GM, and owner.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. Maybe the owner will talk to the starting quarterback, Carson Wentz, but even that, it's not really involved in football. He certainly, forget about backup quarterback, he's not talking to your best players. It's not what the owner does. So it's obviously another indication that he was heavily involved in the process of firing the offensive coaches. I don't think he was involved with the defensive coaches. And really, Corey didn't get fired. He left because he got a better job at Philip Daniels. We kind of told everyone, and Adam Kaplan reported on Jeff's show. We had already said Matt Burke was getting one of those two jobs, whether it was secondary coach or whether it was defensive line coach. He's getting one of those two jobs. So it's pretty evident that they cleared out Philip Daniels to make room for Matt Burke. So I don't think Jeffrey got involved on that side of the ball, but he was involved, and he forced Doug Peterson to fire Mike Groh and Carson Walsh. And Carson Walsh probably deserved to get fired, let's be honest. Mike Groh, I don't think he deserved to be fired.
All right. So I guess the next question that is interesting is, how about the news that McCown wants to play, and does that tie him to returning as the backup quarterback here next year?
Not necessarily.
If you want to keep him as a coach down the line, doesn't that mean you should, in fact, bring him back to be on your roster if you want him on your staff at some time?
Yeah, I mean, if that's your plan. But I don't think it's that important if you want to start him out the normal way. If you want to start him out as a quality control coach or even a position coach, I don't think it's necessary that you have to have him on your staff. Then he'll just go about it like everybody goes about it. When he does decide to walk away, and if he does want to be a head coach, he'll go about through the normal process, and if you're interested, you can revisit it at that time. If they have high hopes, as I said, they should have offered him the OC job and made the decision difficult for him, because I think it's a different decision for Josh McCown if he's offered the OC job. If he's offered position coach quality control, well, he could go make multiple millions playing football again. He proved to himself he could play. He proved to the rest of the league he could still play and is a top-tier backup. That's significantly more money than a quality control coach in the NFL. So I think if you put him on the fast track to being a head coach, I think it's a much more difficult decision, and the Eagles didn't do that.
So, John, let's step back and look at the Eagles a little bit from an outside perspective or a big picture. Before 2016, when Doug was hired, they kind of, after the Chip Kelly, Howie Roseman situation that Jeffrey finally put the kibosh on, they had this reputation as a team that for a long time had discord in the front office. They weren't always on the same page. There were a little, infighting between, and they were able to succeed, at least from a record standpoint, under Andy Reid, because they were very, very, very well coached. And I wonder if they're kind of, and it seemed like after they won the Super Bowl, that went away, and everybody felt like everybody had started anew and learned the lessons of the past. But do you feel like they're starting to trickle down that same path, that they're a really well-coached team that's going to have to deal with a lot of fluff and maybe discord and disagreement and soap opera-like storylines from up above?
Yes. I think if you look at Howie Roseman's history, and I often talk about the pelts on his wall, I think people forget about that after he lost one. Mm-hmm. He won so many battles, and then he lost one against Chip Kelly. And then he came back, and that Howie Roseman 2.0, everything was kumbaya. But he's got a long history of not getting along with people in the front office. And we talked about his second stint. He'd have to mature. He'd have to learn how to work with people. And I think that was one of the caveats that Jeffrey Lurie placed on. Mm-hmm. But now as we fast forward, it's interesting. I think the Eagles, they found a coach who at least publicly and at least honestly, even behind the scenes when we're around, he doesn't have a big ego. And it's pretty amazing to me. And I keep waiting for the shoe to drop. I keep saying to myself, mm-hmm. Nobody could have this less of an ego at his position. And I'm talking about Doug Peterson. I'm talking about a Super Bowl winning coach. I mean, again, I go back to winning the Super Bowl. He didn't push for any personnel power, which was amazing to me. And now he's made the postseason 3 consecutive years. And we've talked about his job performance and talking about all the injuries, all the personnel mistakes, getting all the practice squad people ready. Still made the playoffs, granted in a bad division, but nonetheless, it's tough to make the postseason in the NFL, never mind 3 years in a row. And the owner's firing the coaches he wants. To me, I would be pretty angry about that. And I would be starting to get my back up. And it's not a matter, and I've talked about it on this show, Doug's very loyal to his assistants. That might be – Jeffrey Lurie might be right. I've said that consistently. People miss that. They never hear that. He might be right. But my issue has been Doug Peterson has earned the right at this point to pick his own assistants, and certainly his right-hand man. And I can't believe at some point – I don't know when it's going to be, but at some point the ego is going to take over and say, this is ridiculous. What I've done for your organization, and you're not going to give me the benefit of the doubt? I'm surprised it hasn't boiled to that point already, to be honest.
John, I know I've asked you a similar question in the past, but does Doug care about that? And if he does care about that, then why hasn't he had that discussion? And you're not supposed to know if he has or hasn't, but I guess just your feel on the situation about how much that could be potentially bothering Doug and how it impacts the staff.
Well, as I said, everybody's got an ego at some level. And, I mean, this guy has been a long time, as I said, NFL player. So, I mean, there's got to be, under all the layers, there's got to be some level of ego, some level of confidence. I think you see the confidence. Maybe he's smart enough to understand that coaches who do seize personnel, it generally doesn't work out well for them because the jobs are so big. You can't do them both. So even if you have the power, you have to delegate that power to people you trust anyway, because you can't do the job because you got to get the team ready in season. You can't be worried about college scouting and personnel. It's just too big of a job. So that part, maybe he's just smart enough to realize that's the way to go. But I do think, I mean, at some point, and I think it's going to happen, and I think it probably already is happened. Not only did Jeffrey step in and fire people that Doug wanted to keep, he also made him look like an idiot on top of it. Right. I think people already forget about that because Doug went up there and said, no, they're going to be back. And then he was told they can't be back. So that makes him look bad. And then he's got to go on an apology tour. Oh, no, I didn't mean that. Right. Well, what do you mean you didn't mean that? You said you didn't couch it. So he looks bad. And he looks bad because of the owner. So I'm sure it's already happened. The question is, when does it show publicly?
Johnny Mac, Football at 4 is back, and we look at the other spots real fast. This coordinator thing, but this McCown story I thought was fascinating last night because we had thrown his name out as, he'd probably be a guy, but little did you know that, hey, we want to offer you something, and then he retorts with, no, I want to keep playing. So I thought that was pretty significant, but the other spots still, too, are all open as well. We haven't had anything definitive on anything else, correct?
No, nothing definitive. I imagine they're going to probably, when they make the decision on the offensive coordinator, they're going to announce the whole staff at that particular time. But, yeah, I mean, Matt Burke is going to be, as I said, one of the coaches on the defensive side of the ball. So, and that was, we already knew that. So the question was, what was he going to be? Because his history before he became the defensive coordinator was the linebackers coach. So, but when you're a coordinator, obviously you work with every position. So in theory, he could take over the secondary or the defensive line. But we know Jim Schwartz, what's most important to his defense, the defensive line. So he wants his closest confidant on the defensive line. That makes a lot of sense. And so really you're talking about secondary coach, receivers coach, and offensive coordinator at this point because Matt's getting one of those jobs.
All right. By the way, Gary Kubiak will take over as offensive coordinator in Minnesota for the Vikings. So there's a coordinator position that has been filled. Now, he was already there, but they just give him the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, it was his offense. That was the weirdest setup ever. It's amazing because, Gary had significant health problems, and that's the reason he wasn't the coordinator because he didn't want to take on all that responsibility. Kevin Stefanski is the offensive coordinator running his offense, his scheme, and he gets a head coaching job. And then Gary says, all right, I'll do it. He's running it's his offense anyway.
And then last, of course, we heard yesterday, it will be official tomorrow, Eli Manning will retire after 16 years. John McMullen, if you had a Hall of Fame vote, are you voting for Eli Manning?
No, I think people that have listened to this show know where I stand on that one. I think it's ironic because of all the Derek Jeter talk in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and obviously people have brought up the New York connection. I mean, how do you compare Eli Manning to Derek Jeter? One is a no-brainer. The other is Hall of Fame person, mediocre quarterback who had 2 runs. That's not what the Hall of Fame is for. I'm sorry.
All right. Johnny Mac votes no for Eli Manning. I thought you'd go that way.
No surprises.
No. And he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thank you, guys.